call this meeting to order. I'm sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues. Mr. Paquet, someone will reach out to you shortly so that we can hear from you. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 68 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages, pursuant to Standing Order 1083 and the motion adopted by the committee on April 21st, 2023. The committee is meeting to continue its study on increasing Francophone immigration to Canada. Today's meeting takes place in a hybrid format in accordance with the Order of the House adopted on June 15, 2023. Members can participate in person or via the Zoom application. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to pass on some instructions to witnesses and MPs. Before speaking, please wait for me to call your name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Concerning interpretation, for those of you on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece to select the desired channel. Although this room is equipped with a high-performance audio system, it is possible for feedback to occur. This can be extremely harmful to the interpreters, causing them serious injury. The most common cause of feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise extreme caution when handling earpieces, especially when your own or your neighbor's microphone is switched on. To prevent incidents and safeguard the auditory health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into their assigned microphone and to avoid handling the earpieces by placing them on the table, away from the microphone when they are not in use. Please note that all comments from members and witnesses must be addressed to the chair. For members present in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For Zoom members, please use the raise hand function. The committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain speaking order, and we thank you for your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion concerning connection tests, I wish to inform the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection test prior to the meeting. Unfortunately for the moment, and we hope that it is just for the moment, Mr. Paquet was having some technical difficulties that we will try to resolve shortly. First of all, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Here in the room, Mr. Pichette and Mr. Castonguay, and virtually Mr. Paquet. I would also like to welcome new members today. Welcome to this committee, the best committee in town, Mr. Liu and Madame Roy. Welcome to committee. As you know, each witness has 5 minutes to present their introductory remarks, and then we will have a Q&A session with MPs for a predetermined amount of time. I'll tell you how it works, but for now, we are here to listen to you. So I would give the floor to Mr. Castonguay first. You have the floor for 5 minutes. I'd just like to tell you that I have the most difficult task, and that is to remind you about time, and I may have to cut you off, and that goes to MPs as well. The stricter we are with time, the more time we have to ask for questions. So, Mr. Castonguay, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My presentation is called Canada's Language Policy, Stubbornly Going the Wrong Way. The latest census confirmed once again that Canada's language policy is failing to preserve the status of French in Canada. That goes for policy outside of Quebec as well. In 2021, Canadians who spoke French as at home fell below 20%. Quebec's French-speaking majority has plunged to record lows of 76% for French as a mother tongue and 79% for French as a main language. In contrast, the weight of English is growing on both counts. Assimilation to English is powering these trends. Assimilation of French mother tongue Canadians to English as a main home language has risen steadily, from 280,000 in 1971 to 460,000 in 2021. Since the turn of the century, a similar trend has now taken hold in Quebec. Between 2001 and 2021, Anglicization of French mother tongue Quebecers increased from 8,000 to 40,000. It is also an issue outside of Quebec. When it comes to Canadians for non-official mother tongue, 2.9 million have now been assimilated to English, while for assimilation to French, that has increased to 290,000, which is at 10 times less. On the whole, the gain which English draws through assimilation in Canada has thus grown to well over 3.3 million, whereas French is left with a net loss of 170,000. The latest census also tells us more about Francophone immigration to Canada. This essentially means immigrants of French mother tongue or immigrants of non-official mother tongue who are more at ease in French than in English. Former censuses have shown that outside of Quebec and New Brunswick, a majority of French mother tongue immigrants assimilate to English by the very first generation, while the vast majority of French mother tongue immigrants who settle in Quebec do not. So therefore, we should logically encourage these people to settle in Quebec or New Brunswick rather than elsewhere. In 2021, Quebec included 87% of Canada's French mother tongue population, but Quebec's share of French mother tongue immigrants was only 77%. In other words, Quebec is already not receiving its fair share of such immigration. On the other hand, since the 2006 census, a slowly growing majority of Quebec's non-official mother tongue population is now assimilating to French rather than to English. That's a good piece of news. In contrast, there has been absolutely no movement in favor of French among the non-official mother tongue population outside of Quebec. In 2006, over 2.2 million people had assimilated to English, compared to a microscopic 10,700 who had assimilated to French. And by the 2021 census, whether they had been at one time more at ease in French or not, close to 2.7 million, that is well over 400,000 more, had assimilated to English, compared to an even more microscopic 12,500 to French. Clearly, if French is to have a decent future in Canada, immigrants of non-official mother tongue who are more at ease in French than in English should be encouraged to settle first and foremost in Quebec. 15 seconds, and likewise for immigrants of French mother tongue. Thank you, Mr. Castonguay. You can add more during the Q&A round, as you know. And now, for BB Immigration, Mr. Pichet, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have chosen to present 5 recommendations in the interest of time in the exercise that we were mandated to FAIR in order to increase the success rate of Francophone applications for immigration to Canada. Our first recommendation is to strengthen the role of authorized representatives for the French-speaking populations of Africa and the French-speaking world. The goal is very simple: to try to get rid of crooks that rob people of their savings and lead to their first refusal of their immigration file. The second suggestion is to allocate additional resources to embassies responsible for large pools of Francophones and Francophiles. I'm not reinventing the wheel by telling you this, but they are asking for working. If you compare there are twice. The processing times are twice as long in Francophone Africa as they are in similar Anglophone areas. And the other thing that I would suggest is to allow public servants to request extra information when it is missing. And that is a practice that we saw in recent years that unfortunately has disappeared. So if there is a good file where there is a comma missing or a percentage missing, then it would be rejected, and it needs to be based on the candidacy of they need to give public servants the right to ask for additional information. And the other point that I would like to do is that there needs to be more descriptive and detailed reasons for refusal. People who want to come to Canada won't back down after their first refusal. If they need to know why their first application was refused, or they will repeat the same errors in subsequent applications. And we see that this is an issue with artificial intelligence, and that deals with my fifth recommendation. We need to minimize the bias introduced by AI in claims processing. Canada is very attractive, and that means that there will always be more applications, and we won't be able to get by without AI. But when we look at where Francophone immigration comes from, we need to minimize the biases that are introduced by AI, one or two refusals, or someone could be refused for their entire lives. So we need to rework our AI to ensure that it better takes into this account better. It needs so there can't be less fair decisions rendered because of AI. And finally, I would ask you to avoid the trap of don't exclude temporary permits from your deliberations. We didn't look at that in Quebec for a long time because of semantic issues, but temporary residents often become permanent residents, and so you should look at that in your study. And the last thing that I would say before I'm available for questions, obviously, is that bilingual needs are not directly proportional to the number of applications received by IRCC and submitted in French. We are not better than other immigration countries. When we see that there is a way of
Ce n'est pas bêtement le nombre de demandes en français.
So if we think that someone will get service faster in English, then we will advise our clients to do that for consular services. So I hope that I fell within the time, and I will be available for all of your questions if you have any. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pichette. You had another minute left. Okay. So when you talked about settlement services, what I can tell you about settlement services is that the needs are really vary. There are some people who arrive with binders on the region where they're moving, and then there's some people who just have a backpack, and that's it. So it seems that you should be investing a lot of. Perhaps it would be more judicious to support resources in the bilingual, to make resources that are already available more bilingual, to favor better settlement of Francophone immigrants in Canadian communities. Thank you, Mr. Pichette. Mr. Paquette, no, he has not yet resolved his issues. I'll just suspend. Inaudible for the interpreter. We'll continue with the witnesses that we have. So first of all, Mr. Gaudin, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Castonguay, for traveling and joining us in person. And listen, Mr. Castonguay, I listened to your speech and I thought it was very interesting. And I must say that we made the same observation. French is declining in Canada and in Quebec. And now I would like to hear from you more on the methods that we need to take to counter this situation and to stop French from hemorrhaging. And then I will address myself more to Mr. Pichette. What I understood from you today is that you are on the ground and you are living this on a daily basis with immigrants who want to come work in Canada. And so you mentioned that we need to strengthen representation in Africa because it is a very important pool in Francophonie. And can you explain to us where are the blockages in the system? Because we know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we know that there are many Francophone Africans who wish to come to Canada. What are the blockages, and where do you intervene in the process? And what tools do we need to do things better and bring in more immigrants?
Thank you, Mr. Godin. Here's what's happening. In those countries, everybody knows somebody who has been to Canada. So these are communities that are very tight-knit, and they will be talking to the people that they know, relatives, instead of talking to a lawyer who is specialized in Canadian immigration. They're going to really buy this fantastic little story, and they will get into this process led by somebody who really does not have their interests at heart. So when I speak of these representatives, what I'm talking about is not give your money to just about anybody. We have organizations that supervise these processes, and that's the appropriate way to go ahead. So are you saying that Canada should have some sort of licensing of agents that are certified in immigration, specifically in Africa, in order to be more efficient and more professional, as well as more respectful of the administrative process? Is that correct? The licensing and certification already exists. Lawyers, notaries in Quebec, for example, but in foreign countries, we have to explain to them that not anyone can just help them in the right way. They should save money for this project, and they could do it on their own. But if they are going to be working with somebody, that they have to pick the right person and not just some charlatan. I'm going to move on to another idea. Now, let's say this immigrant has managed to send their application to IRCC. We're talking about somebody who has been whose application has been refused 2 or 3 times. What solution would you propose to make this process go faster and bring in more Francophone immigrants? I don't know if the delays are that long. Perhaps we need to ask for more details on a certain case in order to avoid the refusal. But there are sometimes some recurring reasons. I'm going to read it out for you because after such a response, it's very difficult to submit another application. Here's the only justification that is given. The reason for your visit is not compatible with a temporary stay because of the reasons you provided in your application. That's it. So good luck making a second request. We have absolutely no additional information, and these people really want to come to Canada. You have no idea. I mean, maybe you do know how attractive Canada is, but these people will not stop. They're going to try over and over again, and sometimes they'll get rejected up to 4 times before understanding why their application has been refused, or rejected, rather. What happens after a first rejection? Does the immigrant have to start over again and then things are delayed yet again? Or do they review and correct course in order to allow the immigrant to update their file, for example? Well, legally, there are certain ways to go ahead, but that's not always the case. There's also access to information requests, but it's not a simple process and it's not always very clear. So most of the time, 85% of the time, the strategy is to just submit again and go through the delays. And if it's not clear why their application was initially rejected, then they just hope that it will be accepted later. Would you say that Francophone immigrants' files are experiencing more delays than English ones? Well, Philippines, India, China, Anglophone immigrants come from these places. So 5, 6, 11 weeks for work permits. France, 15 weeks. Tunisia, 19 weeks. Morocco, 19 weeks. Algeria, 18 weeks. Colombia, or Senegal rather, 11 weeks. And Ghana, 13 weeks. So we don't necessarily have the same resources. I don't have the exact data, but asking the question means you kind of know the answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Pichette and Mr. Godin. I think now is the time to conduct a test. Mr. Paquet is not there yet? Or rather, Mr. Paquet. So since he's not there, Mr. Drouin, on to you for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Castonguay, you made opening remarks that shocked me a little bit, but I'm not surprised. I am used to it. Raymond Lévesque sang in a long time ago that Albertan children did not have access to Francophone schools, but now they do have access to that. There's a lot of Francophone resilience outside of Quebec. We just have to support it and understand it. It's normal that Quebec and international Francophonie, well, we are a minority in the whole world, but I am used to working as in such a, well, I have a minority position, and of course, it's like I'm being held on a respirator in a way. But I do believe that with 1.7 million children in Quebec or in the rest of Canada, or 1.83 children in France, the Francophonie will survive thanks to immigration. So I am extending my hand for us to work together. The future of Francophonie is in Africa. Mr. Pichette, you made an excellent recommendation. You talked about these crooks and charlatans, people who take advantage of others. Of course, I have an issue with that. I don't know how to fix that issue. We know that we have to do better in the Francophonie. We have to be better with regards to immigration than others, because we are living in a minority situation, whether it's in France or elsewhere. We are a minority in Canada. So how can we be more efficient in getting those immigrants? I'm not going to argue over this. We have to get immigrants from Africa. Young people want to work. They don't have jobs. Canada and Quebec are fantastic places for them to be welcomed. You talked about resources in the embassies. Why did you say that? Well, that's what I was saying. We need people to have enough time to explain why files have been rejected. And this way, an employer will not hesitate. Sometimes if they're getting a worker from France or from the Maghreb, it takes 4 months longer. You're correct, Mr. Drouin. Young Francophones are in Africa, and they are increasingly educated. They want to come here. So with more resources, we will have more time to process the applications. With the under the Canadian flag, when consular folks have the time to do the processes, well, of course, when the government itself I'm a lawyer, and so I have a code of ethics to follow, for example. So I might be preaching to the choir, or I'm preaching my own gospel, rather. When we look outside of Canada to attract more immigrants, of course we have to widen the pool. But we tell people, nurses, doctors, come over here. What role can professionals play in order to tackle the labor shortage? Do you think that our universities have a role to play in there? Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. The lack of flexibility and of these organizations definitely plays a role. Various professional associations who have more flexibility will have better results. Some people come here with a medical degree, but they end up driving an Uber or another odd job. Question to Mr. Castonguay. Do you think that we should have more embassies in Francophone countries? I know that there are issues with regards to coups and stability in these countries, but do you think that we should have accrued presence in those countries? Instead of going from Gabon to Dakar, for example, which are not necessarily close to one another. And of course, in Canada, we can take advantage of the fact that we can travel easily in our country. But in Africa, sometimes they have to pass by Paris to go back to another African city. What do you think we should do about this? You don't have much time. I don't like being associated to Mr. Bokkote. Try to think outside the box, as we say in English. I'm trying to get you to realize that in Quebec, and even outside of Quebec, we have a lower birth rate. Anglophones have an even lower birth rate than Francophones in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. But French is having a declining in Canada. Sorry, Mr. Castonguay, we are at time. Mr. Paquette, we will take a chance and try to do a test live. If I don't interrupt you, it's because things are going well. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for welcoming me to this committee, which you said is the best committee. The interpreter must interrupt service due to the quality of sound.
Excusez-moi, monsieur Paquette, désolé, je ne sais pas qu'est-ce qui cloche. Moi, je suis pas technicien, mais ça ne fonctionne pas de ce côté ici.
Ça fonctionnait tout à l'heure quand on a fait les tests.
Je sais, mais moi...
My apologies, Mr. Paquette. I am not a technician. I'm just the chair, and I don't have the solutions. You're very patient for having tried to do the tests. Perhaps you can still remain, and if you have any comments to make, you can send them to the clerk of the committee, and perhaps we can invite you once again to have your comments in person, or perhaps virtually if we've corrected the problem. But all of my apologies from the Hill and from the members of the committee. Ms. Goodridge? Well, I can hear the sound, and it's totally fine. Mr. Paquette's sound is fine. I just wanted to get that message across to the member. Ms. Goodridge, from the technical side, in the room, it is perfect. It's not just good sound, it is perfect sound. The issue is in the interpreting booth. That is where there is a technical issue. I don't want to go on about this. I want us to use our time efficiently. Mr. Paquette, I am so very sorry. You have no idea how embarrassing this is. We are going to have to go on to to something else, but if you can share your comments with the clerk, we will send them over to the members of the committee. And hopefully we'll be able to invite you again some other time. Mr. Godin, actually, here's what I think we should suggest to Mr. Normand, or rather Mr. Paquet, is not only to send us his opening remarks, but the specific recommendations, so that we can table a report. I think it would have been useful to hear what he has to say, because he really knows what the reality of our companies in Canada and Quebec is. But Mr. Paquet, I think that I would just like to tell you directly that we would love to receive your recommendations and your opening remarks. Absolutely. So on to the next question, the second vice chair of the committee, Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Castonguay, Mr. Pichette, thank you very much for being here. Mr. Castonguay, you seem to want to add something. Well, what I was talking about was the lowest birth rate of Anglophones and Francophones in Canada. Everybody knows about that. What people don't know is that that the statistics demonstrate that Quebec is a province just like any other. There is an anglicization, a clear anglicization of Francophones in Quebec. We're talking about 40,000 people according to the last census. On the island of Montreal, that means 5% of young adults who have French as a mother tongue. That's 5%. So that is starting to resemble what's happening in New Brunswick. And New Brunswick is starting to resemble the east of Ontario and what it was like. So this is a continuum. We're all in the same boat. That's how I see things. I see that the assimilation rate of young adults with French as a mother tongue in Alberta is 63%. That really hurts. It's not just a lower birth rate, but it also means that these Francophones who are becoming anglicized are actually raising their children in English. So it's a lost cause for the Francophone population. They're increasingly at ease in English, more so than in French. The language spoken at home is a good indication of the official language that these people are comfortable in. Read the report of the study from 2006. The report was signed by Jean-Pierre Corbeil and another colleague from StatsCan. They found that the language spoken at home and the official language we're most comfortable in, or that we use in public most commonly or frequently, and in which we ask for services municipally, federally, and provincially, it's all the same thing. These statistics on the language spoken at home, and which is what becomes the mother tongue of these children, well, we have to really take them into consideration, and we have to reflect as a committee. Do you really think that Canada's dual linguistic nature relies on the OCLMs? That is the end of the quote. That is the first sentence of the policy from 2006 or so from Minister Hamel. I believe that was his name. I couldn't believe it. What about Quebec? We're talking about linguistic duality of Canada being based on other communities. So there is a majority population becoming sort of like a minority in its behavior. There is only one official minority language in Canada. It is French, no matter what you think. So let's think practically here. 10,000, more or less, allophones that are Francisized outside of Quebec. During the last sentence, there's 1.3 million Francotropes, or people who appreciate, people who come from a French country, but who are probably allophones, Belgian, African, Latino. 1.3 million. These people became Francophone. The others started using English. It's more practical, it's more beneficial, and that's where they see their future. In Quebec, it's because of this group of people, because of Hispanophones and people who have mother tongues that are, for example, Portuguese or Romanian. These people have Latin mother tongues that you can transfer into French easily. When we talk about the Francophone parts of Africa, they are becoming, people who are from those regions will tend more towards French. If Quebec has more people coming in than the rest of than the English parts, well, there's still a lot of competition. But people who have a non-official mother tongue, or mother tongue that is not an official mother tongue in Canada, they have a certain penchant for French, maybe because there's a linguistic affinity between their their mother tongue, for example, if it's a Latin language, but sometimes it is a former colony or protectorate, French protectorate. And so it's due to history that, for example, that Vietnam was a country where we could recruit immigrants. There could be some people from Vietnam would then end up speaking French. Outside of Quebec, they don't speak French. Haitians do, but that is a very slim majority. With African languages, not so much.
Thank you. I could just, if you wanted to be practical, Mr. Godin, if you wanted a practical suggestion, thank you, Mr. Castonguay. Thank you. Okay, you'll be able to get into it more later. And now, I have the difficult task of keeping us on time. Now it is the turn of Miss Ashton. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. I'll direct my questions to Mr. Pichette. First of all, the government said that it reduced the processing time for immigration, that processing times are shorter than they've ever been since the pandemic. Do you think that the current processing times are acceptable? Well, if you're asking my clients, business clients, it's never fast enough. If you ask people around the world, it's also long. But the statement that you make doesn't seem out of line. I think it's correct about the pandemic. Are we talking about it's faster? It isn't faster than it's ever been before the pandemic, but you can never have a fast an approval that's too fast for someone who wants a job. For example, if you wanted to drop 19 weeks in Morocco to 5 weeks, they would be happy. Is it acceptable? Well, for the private sector, it's never fast enough, but I don't think it's an objective that's realistic to say that we will satisfy all companies in terms of processing time. Let's move on to another issue that you raised and that we've heard from a number of witnesses. It's about support on the ground. Do you believe that there should be more consular support for immigrants in sub-Saharan Africa? Well, consular services can be very broad. I think that there would be cause if the real objective is to increase the success rate of Francophone immigrants. I think that, yes, there could be, as I said, information sessions where they highlight or authorized representatives. They explain that you shouldn't work with just anyone to submit an application, how to clarify a refusal. I think you could do things like that. Now, what would the scope be? I mean, it would be up to you to define it more than me. Can you share the largest disincentive for your clients to immigrate to Canada? I'm sorry, disincentive? Or the largest obstacle? The processing times. Before the pandemic, it was nearly double time to obtain permanent residency in Quebec versus Canada. So, and I would say once again, they often submit a very substantial file. They don't have the same relationship with public administration. They don't always come from a country with a public service like ours, and they receive a letter with one line, and it's copy and paste, and it tells them your application was requested because we don't think it's well founded. And they try to understand, but they don't have access to anything. And so, if they have an opportunity to go to France, then they take it. It discourages them, I think, quite quickly. Okay, thank you. And a last question about employers and recruitment. Based on your experience, could more work be done on the ground by recruiters assisted by the federal government to bring people to Canada? Yes, there are always a number of organizational issues, but yes, we can always do better. It's always a matter of a cost and benefit, and I'm sure that you're often asked this question by your constituents. We can't do a lot of work to recruit for certain employers, but I think we can do better, but not necessarily more with more funding. And finally, I don't know how much time is left, but if you have anything to add about the recommendations to our committee, you have 1 minute and 20 seconds, Ms. Ashton. Well, it's mostly in the communication with these people. They pay a certain price to have their file processed with or without a representative, and then they don't. They know that we don't look at documents in Arabic, but if the file is refused because they didn't submit the original in Arabic, but the response is cryptic, well, then they don't understand. And someone who's fully francophone might be rejected from joining our workforce. And so we sort of pull the carpet out from underneath them. Did I follow? Did I stay under 1 minute and 20? You have another 30 seconds, Ms. Ashton. Do you have other examples of? I had someone whose work permit was rejected twice because the agent didn't believe that the job offer was authentic. They had a work contract. They wanted a logo on the work contract. That was the issue. Twice they were rejected. And when we got to the appeals court, my employer went back to zero. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. I will use my chair's discretion for the next round of questions. Mr. Généreux, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Mr. Chair, I would like us to agree on the time because we started later for our meeting. So we had set out an hour for these witnesses, and I think we should respect that time despite the technical issues. And the minister will join us after, and he has an hour as well. Are you able to respect the hour? Well, it's because after 6:30, it doesn't bother me, but that means that at 6:30 we need to move on to something else. So we have 15 minutes with the clerk, and then everyone has obligations afterwards. So as in the past, Mr. Chair, a point of order. I and a number of committee members have a meeting at 6:30, right after the meeting. So I don't want this meeting to run late. Mr. Généreux, if it doesn't bother you, if it's fair to everyone, I'll just cut the time in half. So you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Mr. Pichette. Our leader, Pierre Poilievre, proposed a measure to established under a Conservative government to recognize the skills of doctors, nurses, and so on in a number of sectors to be able to do skills recognition and welcome them faster in Canada. Do you think that's a good idea? First question. Second question. You know, in our MP's offices, we're basically offices for IRCC. I have 3 staff members who call IRCC every day, and now we need to book appointments in advance to deal with all of the cases. And the story about the logo that you just told, well, I've heard horror stories like that before. It's completely crazy what we hear. There is a mechanism within IRCC that just is broken, and the backlog is enormous. What do you think we should do? Because I feel like they're sticking on these petty little issues, and I think that's crazy. I'd like to hear from you on that. Well, listen, concerning skills recognition, there are professional orders that will want to protect their professional associations, and I think maybe there needs to be some pressure put on them to say how long will it take to access the bar or the doctors association, and I think that would be logic. They'll say that they need money, but I think there's jurisdiction that needs to be reviewed. Concerning your other point, you're right once again. I think there is something outside of our control. We underestimate geopolitically, there are not as many places as stable as Canada that offers the same quality of life as Canada. So I think more and more people are becoming attracted to Canada. And so our processing times are suffering as a result. And the magic solution, well, more resources would help. But Mr. Pichette, thank you. You are really stuck to the time. Mr. Sanson, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the 2 witnesses. And to Mr. Pichette, I appreciated some of the recommendations that you made. Mr. Castonguay, I must also mention how disappointed I am about that vision. Perhaps you were talking about Statistics Canada. I'm not sure if you're aware that since 1996, French schools in Canada have taken control we saw a steady increase across Canada, including the territories, in French school enrollment. And it's quite impressive. If I look at Nova Scotia, we nearly doubled the student population in French schools. So if I take your suggestion, it means that Nova Scotia, for example, should just accept that everything becomes English and not welcome newcomers, Francophone newcomers in Nova Scotia. That's very disappointing. And I'll say, if you look at the number of students, you'll see that there's incredible vitality that is being strengthened. I know that Quebec is doing work, but saying that it's a waste of time to send French speaking newcomers to these regions that have exceptional vitality is really missing the boat. And I think it's lacking the vision of bilingualism in Canada and linguistic duality. I'm very disappointed. You have the right, you are entitled to your opinion, and I respect it, but there is exceptional vitality across Canada in OLMCs. I don't know if my 2 minutes is up. I don't have a question other than to say that, other than to ask you, don't you think that the statistics you are, the strategy that you're suggesting will undermine French outside of Quebec and in New Brunswick and in other areas? In 5 seconds, please. Well, the house is on fire, and we need to save lives. Thank you, Mr. Castonguay. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor for 1 minute and 15 seconds. Oh, that's tight. Mr. Castonguay, would you say that federal language policy takes into account scientific data? Is it based on science? No, it's going against the data. I'm sorry, Mr. Sanson, but the rate of anglicization in Nova Scotia in the last census was 57%. Most people become English despite French schools. And even in Quebec, it's not keeping up. Half of those who go to school in French because they are forced to go there in primary and secondary school go to CEGEP in English. On the island of Montreal, there are many English CEGEPs that are getting new recruits, half of them. When Anglos on the island of Montreal represent 1 in 3 francophones. Just to flesh that out a bit. Once again, 1 out of 1,000 adopts French as a language of use at home. Direct them where they will be able to grow in French and live in French. Thank you, Mr. Castonguay. The floor, Ms. Ashton, our colleague, has the floor for 1 minute and 15 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to ask one last question to Mr. Pichette. But before that, I would also just like to say, as a Francophile in Western Canada, I'm also a bit troubled by some of the comments made during our meeting. We welcome all testimony, but I would say that here in Western Canada, not only do we need immigration, but we need to continue to meet the significant demand in our communities for education in French, in early childhood, in French immersion as well. And that is how we will grow a bilingual generation across our country outside of Quebec. Finally, I would like to ask Mr. Pichette, you shared some really shocking examples a few minutes ago. Do you have other examples to share about how IRCC is not doing the work it should to help people who want to come to Canada? Thank you, Ms. Ashton. That's a good question. So, Mr. Pichette, I would invite you. Well, that's all the time we have, but Mr. Pichette, Mr. Castonguay, and Mr. Paquette, who is not with us anymore, is it okay? If we are short on time, so we need to move on to other witnesses, but if there is any additional information that you think would be useful to share with the committee, please share it with us through our clerk. You can you can send it to us, and our clerk will share it with all of our committee members. You did great work to all of our committee to our witnesses. Thank you for coming before committee, and once again, please don't hesitate to share any information with us that you wish in writing, and we would be happy to take it into account in this study. Thank you very much. We will suspend briefly so that we can bring in our next panel of guests. Thank you.
Souhaiter la...
So I'd like to welcome the minister, our new minister. Welcome to him and his officials, Ms. Fox and Deputy Minister, and Ms. Scott, Assistant Deputy Minister. As you know, you have the floor for 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will move on to question period. I am very strict on time, just to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask their questions. Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that we are indeed on the same page. The motion for the minister's visit said that we would have the visit for 1 full hour. There seemed to be some issues earlier with regards to time from members of on the other side, but the motion did say 1 full hour. Indeed, the motion did say so, but in the first hour we had some technical issues due to the witnesses. It is nobody's fault. Not mine, not yours, not the minister's. So we would need unanimous consent of the entire committee to go over time. So I think that we should make that decision, or rather go ahead, in order to give our witnesses as much time as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kwekwe Ulukut, Tansi, bonjour, hello. Before I as you've noted, I am here with my colleagues, Ms. Christian Fox and Ms. Catherine Scott. Ms. Fox was with me at Indigenous Affairs. Before I begin, I'd like to point out that the Parliament of Canada is located on the unceded traditional territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to appear before the Standing Committee on Official Languages for the first time as Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you, dear colleagues, for inviting me to take part in today's discussion. For years, as you know, and since you come from those communities, we've been experiencing a demographic decline in French-speaking communities outside Quebec. According to Statistics Canada, the percentage of francophones has declined in every region of the country, with the exception of the Yukon.
Canada is to increase francophone immigration to strengthen the linguistic, demographic, and economic fabric of francophone communities. And we have been spearheading several initiatives to boost francophone immigration in minority francophone communities, and we're already seeing some positive results, with more to come. En 2022, nous avons atteint la...
In 2022, we reached our target of 4.4% of French-speaking immigrants outside Quebec, 1 year ahead of schedule. We will maintain this target for this year. However, there is still much work to be done to strengthen the French language in Canada. We are working with our partners, including community stakeholders, to set new targets for the next 3 years. These will be ambitious, realistic, and achievable in order to address the issue of declining Francophone minority communities. IRCC's relationship with Quebec, as you no doubt already know, is defined by the Canada-Quebec Accord. This agreement is guided by the principle that immigration must help preserve Quebec's demographic weight and protect its distinct identity. Our government will continue to work with the Quebec government to maintain the vitality of the French language and defend Quebec's interests.
Measures the Government of Canada is taking to protect the French language. This is demonstrated in the recent release of our comprehensive 5-year plan, the Action for Official Languages 2023 to 2028, protection, promotion, and collaboration. It includes 7 key initiatives that build on the existing measures that introduce new ones totaling more than $137 million over 5 years. The Modernization of the Official Languages Act, which received royal assent in June of this year, recognizes the importance of leveraging immigration to enhance the vitality of Francophone minority communities, and we're working to increase and restore their demographic weight by taking a whole-of-government approach to achieve our goals. À cet égard,
in this regard, we are currently working on the development of a Francophone immigration policy, including new targets for the admission of French-speaking immigrants outside Quebec, reforms to the express entry system, which allow for targeted selection of French-speaking applicants, will be crucial in helping us meet our Francophone immigration commitments after 2023. The new policy will guide future action on Francophone immigration outside Quebec and will aim to foster the vitality of Canada's Francophone minorities and contribute to maintaining or increasing their demographic weight.
We'll help promote French languages across Canada, and our efforts will enhance the cultures of Francophone communities outside Quebec and contribute to the slowing and progressively turning around the troubling trend of declining Francophone population. Nous poursuivons nos efforts en matière d'immigration.
We are continuing our efforts to attract French-speaking immigrants from outside Quebec, a top priority for the coming years. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Minister. That's 4 minutes, better than 5. We will start with the questions and comments and reactions for 6 minutes. We will start with the first Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Joël Godin. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. First, I must say that I very much appreciate your availability after your nomination because we had a file that we shared on immigration, and so I would like to say thank you. Now, let's begin. I don't want to be disrespectful, but my questions are short and I would like brief answers because I don't have much time. First question, you've been the minister since July. I don't have the exact date. Do you have your letter or your mandate letter? No. Do we rely on the previous minister's letter, or will you be providing one? I haven't written one yet, and the previous goals remain. They go beyond that minister's mandate. So it'll be copy-paste. So the shuffle will not have changed anything. Well, I think that Mr. Fraser had certain priorities. He did learn French since he was the minister, which I think was noble. I, of course, do have my own priorities. You don't have a mandate letter from the Prime Minister. I'm not the one who writes them, but I do have priorities, and I did communicate my 4 priorities, but you don't know if the Prime Minister will give you a mandate letter. You don't have that information, and I understand that that doesn't belong to you. Indeed. So, next question. We just went ahead with C-13, and we have a law now. How can the Minister of Immigration now, or what is the Minister's obligation and responsibility to act for immigration right now? We're talking about October 4th. Well, first, we can talk about Quebec. We have the duty to coordinate our efforts with Quebec. The arrival of Francophones to maintain vitality in Quebec is an option, but we also have to work on the legal side of things with Quebec, and I am talking about the agreement which you are aware of. And then outside of Quebec, Mr. Minister, I am really talking about your own responsibility as a minister with regards to the new law that has been implemented and received royal assent in June 2023. What is your own responsibility, and what will you be doing as minister to apply this? Well, the answer is to increase the number of people, of Francophones outside Quebec. That is part of Canada's jurisdiction and is included in the law. You know, Mr. Minister, that it is very new to have a Francophone part on C-13. When will you implement the obligations of this law? Well, this year, you will see that I asked the department to implement new departments. Are you doing this of your own accord, or is it because of the law? Well, if the law is making us do it, so again, is it because of the law? Well, the law requires us to set certain targets beyond what is already there in order to reestablish vitality. I'll just stop you right there. Do you know, Mr. Minister, that section 44.1 is not actually implemented right now? Did you know that? Regardless, you will see that The new indicators will demonstrate a new objective so that we can realistically do our job. Do you know when the Government of Canada will table the decree? I have no idea. Mr. Minister, I'm just going to go back into my questions here. Another minute and a half. Do you agree that the Francophone demographics are in decline everywhere in Canada, including in Quebec? When you look at who speaks French, whether it's in Quebec or outside Quebec, French is threatened. But do you think it is in decline? Yes, indeed, French is threatened in North America. Are you the best person to implement the Official Languages Act, after you said that you wouldn't want the Official Languages Act included in the law? Here's what I wanted to see. I wanted us to do our job within our federal jurisdiction. And I wanted Quebec to do it in its own jurisdiction. And we do have the same goal, which is to bring a new life to French. But as minister, my job is to promote French outside of Quebec and work on it in Quebec as well. So my answer to that is yes. You still have about 30 seconds. The Francophone immigration targets, some are not comfortable with your targets. They say that at least 10% is needed in order to reestablish the demographic in Canada. Will you change your targets? These are targets that we can actually achieve. Next questions from Mr. Iacono for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here today to answer some questions. Can you tell us about the consultations that IRCC is leading to elaborate the policies on Francophone immigration? Thank you, Mr. Iacono. As your colleague mentioned, the Official Languages Act requires us to adopt a Francophone immigration policy. We have some targets that are actually achievable, and we have many measures in place in order to meet those targets. I talked about 4.4%. That is a target that is perhaps ambitious, but has never been done by the Government of Canada. So we know that 4.4% will be enough due to with the resources that we have at the IRCC. My objective first is to get to a more ambitious target and then implement more systems in order to improve upon this in the coming years and maybe even increase the target. Hopefully we'll be able to reestablish the demographic weight. My action plan, of course, requires money. We were talking about $13.4 million just to establish this policy. I would say that we can't do this without consultation. We did that with people who are very passionate about French across the country. And we will be able to meet those objectives. We have to be realistic but also ambitious. Quick question. You said that 4.4 is not totally achievable. What do you think we could achieve? I said that the 4.4% was a target that had never been reached before, and we reached that target before our deadline. I will not be satisfied until we reach that target. That's just my nature. But there are mechanisms in place in order to reach the 4.4%, and they were not as robust as I would have liked them to be. That's why I'm not totally satisfied, and I'm more ambitious, because we must establish systems for people outside of Canada in order to be able to welcome people, and also because we want to make sure that we can welcome them. We need to accompany them, and we need the appropriate funds to ensure that there is a certain perennity in these communities. Can you give us an idea of the IRCC measures in order to welcome Francophone immigrants outside of Quebec? What results do you have, and what are the organizations responding to? What is the response?
That's a good question. In 2022-2023, IRCC invested nearly $72 million on Francophone settlement services in Francophone communities. And furthermore, additional investments of $50 million are set out in the action plan on official languages over the 2023 to 2028 to strengthen Francophone capacities in minority settings. And that will allow for a number of initiatives that have never been properly funded. So obviously people want results, but I can tell you that following our consultations, most stakeholders are happy to see not only that this act has been refurbished, but also that there are these investments to ensure the sustainability of French. The Action on Official Languages is investing $132.2 million over 5 years for Francophone immigration, in addition to a cumulative funding of $84.3 million in the previous action plans. How will this funding help IRCC with the promotion and recruitment of Francophone immigrants? When I talked about this 4.4% target that we want to grow to 5, 6, 7, 8%, I talk about the mechanisms that we needed to establish, and that requires planning. It's not just seeking out an inventory of people and Francophones that want to come to Canada. It would be unacceptable to do that way. There need to be necessary activities. There need to be promotion outside of Canada and within Canada for accompaniment services. And also in 2022, we had 540 different promotional activities within Canada. And to that end, and in the international context, about 290 external activities. And that means a number of things. The establishment of resources in Western Africa, whether it be in other parts of the world where people speak French, to ensure that people who wish to come to Quebec are accompanied and that we can promote Canada. And there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of work to be done to ensure that these people who want to come to Canada are triaged fairly. The work has started, and it will bear fruit. You will now hear from Mr. Beaulieu, who has the floor. Thank you to the Minister for joining us. Very quickly, I would like to announce that I am tabling a motion that we proceed with at the next meeting that says that in accordance with Section 1083 and given information published by Radio-Canada last Thursday, which deals with possible official languages violations within the RCMP, that we invite the RCMP Commissioner to discuss the RCMP's plan to comply with the Official Languages Act. Thank you. So, Mr. Minister, you spoke earlier, you said there is a decline of French outside of Quebec, and you were evasive about the question by my colleague. Do you think that there is a decline in French in Quebec? It's clear that French is threatened in Quebec. Is it in decline or not? French is threatened in Quebec, but it's not in decline. It's clear. If we look at Quebec in the 1970s and 80s, there was more English spoken in Montreal. I think efforts have been made in Quebec to strengthen French, but there's always this threat just by the fact that Quebec geographically is in North America. And, well, you are avoiding the question once again. Because whether it's in terms of mother tongue, language of use at the home, first official language spoken, language of work, there is a decline of French in comparison to English in Quebec. In Montreal, even more so. There's a lot more English based on all of these indicators in Montreal. So there is a decline of French in Quebec, but you don't seem to want to admit it. What I can say is that when I go knocking on doors in my riding, well, I'm going to interrupt you because it's not, I'm talking about scientific data and statistics, but let's move on to another subject. Well, on the same principle, French needs to be protected and revitalized in Quebec, but you won't say that French is in decline, and there need to be means invested to fight that. But then in terms of investment in Francophone immigration, there is a nerve center in Quebec. So I was happy that you said you were ready to work with people because there are stakeholders in different immigration offices overseas that don't seem to have concerns about collaborating with Quebec. Because if you are favoring more Francophone immigration outside of Quebec, with all of the Canadian immigration offices, Quebec is seeking candidates from the same pools. And there's the risk that we weaken unless there is close collaboration. And then I think that the federal government should help Quebec achieve its objectives in Francophone immigration. Naturally, it has its own jurisdictions, but you are seeking candidates from the same pools. Otherwise, there's temporary immigration and the other categories of immigration that are controlled solely by the federal government. And in those sectors, are you ready to try to increase Francophone immigration? Yes, on both sides. I would say that people who come here aren't objects. We can't just move them as we wish and say it's all the same thing. And we can't take from one to favor another. That's not the case. We assume, and I want Quebec to assume its jurisdiction and we want to help them. And I have discussions with Mr. Fréchette, who wants to ensure that people who can speak French go to Quebec as students, and that they can be bridged through to permanent residency. It is a mechanism that we could help them with outside of Quebec too, without stealing from anyone. For international students who are in Quebec, for example, the thresholds are too low to welcome all of them. So perhaps they wish to settle somewhere else and they can have this mobility, and they may not want to stay in the place where they landed. And obviously there are Francophone communities outside of Quebec and within Quebec where we could welcome them. But I'm not talking necessarily about telling people where they want to go, but rather encouraging, because Francophone immigration pools are not unlimited. So we need to try to coordinate so that we don't harm each other. But I am happy to hear that you're open to collaboration. Furthermore, the FCFA was talking about the need for increasing the target to 10%. Well, I think it should be increased across the board for Francophone immigration. Do you think that that's achievable to go above and beyond the 4.4%? Because it obviously won't reduce the demographic weakening. Well, I'll share with you what I said to the FCFA. I would like to increase it to 6, but that's a 50% increase. It's a target that would be difficult to achieve. It will take ambition and mechanisms that are established to ensure the system is sustainable and that it can be further increased. It is the burden that I am putting on my colleagues at my left and right here, but I think it is achievable. Thank you, Mr. Minister. The next round of questions comes from Ms. Ashton. You have the floor for 6 minutes, Ms. Ashton. Thank you very much. Speaking of the FCFA, we know that the FCFA is seeking to achieve a 2% target over the next 3 years concerning Francophone immigration outside of Quebec to restore the demographic weight of Francophone and Acadian communities to their 1971 levels. Would you be in favor of the FCFA's proposal to increase to 12%? What I said clearly to the FCFA when I met with them, I've already met them twice, once in person, I agree with them on the basic principle that we need to increase the thresholds regardless of the number. What they proposed, if I recall correctly, it was 10%, but it would need to be achievable. I don't want to set objectives that are too high and disappoint everyone. We need to establish mechanisms within the department to ensure that we can then make the increases, because I think that, yes, going from 4.4 to 6% is achievable but difficult, but I am confident that I'm not confident we could achieve it right now, but I am confident that my staff will help me meet the challenge and then increase the thresholds more easily, whether it's to 7 or 8 subsequently. But I say before this committee that it will be difficult and it will take a collaborative effort to attract people who speak French to Canada, whether it's from Western Africa or other parts of the world. On that point, and I'm conscious of the time, witnesses talked about failures. Ms. Ashton, we lost 5 to 10 seconds of your. We heard from a number of witnesses that they directly tied the failure to attract Francophone immigrants to shortcomings in offices in sub-Saharan Africa. Do you think that we need to make additional investments in sub-Saharan Africa processing offices? Yes, we have been strengthening our capacities in Western Africa and Cameroon, among other places. I would say also that what was unacceptable, the 27% that we saw in 2021, increased to 37%. So yes, efforts are being made in terms of staffing and resources, but also a review of the reasons for which people were rejected in their applications to come to Canada compared with the rest of the world. So I think that it's not necessarily a lack of resources, but perhaps there was some work to address staffing, and there were mechanisms that had to be established. Thank you. And the next question is that today Canada announced that there is no major business currently being carried out at the Centre for Innovation and Francophone Immigration in Dieppe. I would give the floor to my Deputy Minister. First of all, there are half a dozen people working there on a program to support the $25 million that will be unveiled in the coming year. It's clear that an institute of this level is a testament to what I was talking about. We need to establish mechanisms to increase our thresholds. I expect the activity will increase, but it's clear that it's an institution that is at its very beginning. And we can't judge it after just a few months of activities. But to answer the rest of the question, well, I appreciate the answer. I'd like to move on to another issue. The only thing that I would add is that it's a long start. The centre was announced years ago in Dieppe, so we are expecting more from it. Moving on to concrete action and leadership on immigration that we need, particularly outside of Quebec, as your government is responsible for Francophone labor shortages? Will you seek to attract Francophone early educators, recognizing that Canada has a labor shortage in education? There are 10,000 positions that need to be filled in French schools and in French early childhood. Is that something that you are ready to take leadership on? Recognizing that education falls under provincial jurisdiction, but knowing that labor shortages are a federal responsibility, and we need federal leadership on the issue. In less than 10 seconds. Yeah, well, there are a number of issues. Well, labor is the responsibility of all levels, but we made a $16 million investment to recruit French teachers. That with Quebec, we are always willing to work with them to ensure that there is a follow-up on this teacher shortage. I need to be fair with everyone. I'm sorry, we need to move on. But I know I have the hardest job here. I need to bring out the hammer sometimes. So welcome to Mr. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Kimmich. Yes, you were at my committee before, and now I'm here with you again. We were supposed to see you again tomorrow, but you canceled your visit. I was going to say because you spoke about foreign institutions in the Francophone, but did you read this article? I don't know what you're showing me. Perhaps you could read it. It says, in Quebec, there's a shortage of lodging or housing for students. New students in Montreal are facing issues finding housing. It just takes 2 times. I know you spend a lot of times on social networks. So I would like to ask you, how can we convince Francophones to come here when they read articles like this in international news media? Well, first of all, if you look at demand, demand is growing for students. I don't know whether I can answer your question within a tweet or within 2 minutes, but it's clear that there is a dynamic with the provinces that we need to respect. Quebec, furthermore, is claiming sole jurisdiction for international students, which is not necessarily the case. It is at least shared, but it's clear that when people attend post-secondary institutions, there's a lot of promises made, and a student, as you know, from overseas pays 4 times what my son would pay at McGill. So for those institutions, there's a lot of cash at play. And those institutions, the federal government also has a role to play, and the provinces as well. They need to make sure that they have adequate housing. But yes, it's an article, but the demand is very high right now. It's customer service. And when I ask the question, when institutions look at who... There are students who are saying things like, when they come to Montreal, they try to find housing and get ready for the school year. They say, it is a total cave. There is no light. A 20% increase in rents since the COVID-19 pandemic, and a shortage of housing means that it's a real fight club to find apartments. And another international student has an intensive search and still nothing. He says, I'm someone very calm, but can someone please help me? And I'm going to have to return in a few days. I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, after these type of stories come out and they deal with the lack of housing and the department and customer service, and IRCC is one of the departments that suffers the most, their application, there's a 2.3 million case backlog. How can we bring so many international students into this country when their experience on the ground is like this? Well, I think you're mixing up a couple of different issues here when we talk about international students, whether they're from France or elsewhere. They want to have an education in French. First of all, Quebec is a very highly sought after destination. You would likely know that the Minister of Immigration and Refugees is not responsible for housing in downtown Montreal. I'm not making excuses. Well, no, you're not responsible for housing for international students when they choose a Canadian or a Quebec university. The Minister of Immigration does the visa process, but the universities, well, obviously there is a moral responsibility. Mr. Kimmich, the interpretation cannot keep up if there are two people speaking at once. So perhaps there cannot be interpretation if two people are speaking at once. So please ask a question and wait for the response.
With regards to the standards of service, with regards to the students, we are below the threshold of 46 days. And then with regards to housing and our responsibility, of course, the university institutions are also responsible. Of course, the federal government has a role to play, but so does the provincial government does. There are massive investments across the country to make sure that there is housing for all the students that come here, but this is something that has to be discussed with the provinces and the universities themselves. It takes no time to read an article. Students are lacking services, and so interpretation must suspend due to multiple speakers. So on to Ms. Taylor-Roy and Mr. Sampson. Ms. Taylor-Roy, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and to your colleagues.
Population, and we heard from the witnesses previously that one of the concerns is that many of the Francophone communities are not keeping up the language, that their children are speaking English, that they're actually losing some of the Francophones there. And in my riding, there is an organization by the name of Trio Blanc, which is a Francophone organization trying to develop a community for Francophones, for seniors, for childcare, etc. There's also an organization called l'AFRI, l'Association des Francophones de la Région de York, et un autre, c'est Partager le Français. So my question is, under the action plan for official languages, which I understand you're going to be working with the Minister for Official Languages, are there programs, are there things that are being done that we can help to ensure that immigrants that come into these communities retain their French language? Are we supporting some of these communities in a way that they can work to keep the French language alive in these minority communities?
It's a really important question because I alluded to it in one of the questions that I answered of one of your colleagues on the other side. We can't just ask people to come to this country and they speak French and expect them to keep the language in a way where after 2 generations, and the statistics prove that after 2 generations that will disappear if you're not properly surrounded. It is the overarching threat of the English language, just by its volume to the French language, in particular outside Quebec, but also inside Quebec. Having raised and continuing to raise 3 kids in 3 different languages, I totally understand the struggle of one of your constituents in making sure that the dominant language does not take over, whether it's through friendships or others, or just by people's surroundings. And it is a constant struggle. And so I'm not going to say that the federal government has all the answers to it, but the official languages plan has settlement services that have gone from 50 to 80 communities across the country. That's important. When I met with some institutions in London that were working and were funded in large part by RRCC, they talked about the importance of making sure people are not only getting their community supports, but are also being able to be integrated in a predominantly Anglophone area where those people are unilingual French. At the same time, trying to preserve the language that we want to support in French. So this is it is a challenge. I think it's one that we can really live up to as the federal government. But there is the need of provincial governments to step up. In this case, Ontario but also, as we've seen in New Brunswick and other provinces. So it is a partial answer to your question, but it is important to realize when we talk about this and we talk about our thresholds and we talk about the mechanisms that we need to put in place in order so that French will thrive outside Quebec, that we have those proper supports. Otherwise, you are just creating the conditions where after 60 to 65 years, people are then speaking the dominant or the dominating language, which is more often than not English.
Il reste à peu près une minute et demie pour M. Sanson.
A minute and a half for Mr. Sampson. I don't know if I can provide enough context in a minute and a half. Mr. Minister, congratulations. I know that you are the right person to deliver the goods. I know that time is short and we have to flip on a dime, as we say at home. And there is an increase. We're hoping that there will be a great increase in immigration. So you talked about the systems and mechanisms. I'm interested in the mechanisms that we can improve on quickly and the new mechanisms that we can put in place. So if I understood correctly, we have to remove obstacles in order to ensure that we can welcome foreign students. And I'm asking if we can retain that strategy for Francophone immigrants, because it's a strategy that works. That is something that we are looking into. I think that it will be important to implement that. When I talk about ambition to my department, to my people, they talk to me about inventory. But of course, the current inventory is not sufficient. Well, what about new mechanisms? Thank you, Mr. Sampson. All right, on to Mr. Beaulieu for 2 minutes and a half. You will be determining the immigration threshold soon. Have you consulted Quebec and have you taken into account their suggestions? As you know, that it's more than just suggestions or recommendations. They are demands that are very legitimate, in my opinion. We have certain agreements, or we are on the same page with regards to certain things. I think that Quebec can do better with regards to welcoming certain families with regards to the family reunification situations. I spoke earlier about confusing things and comparing oranges and apples, but sometimes we talk about foreign temporary workers and then also in agriculture, but we also talk about foreign students, and then we talk about the threshold of immigrants when, as well as lower birth rates. Just a moment, I'll interrupt you. Do you think that do you agree that we have to take into consideration the capacity to integrate and welcome foreigners when elaborating this policy? Well, I've heard this before, and of course, I think that we really should go in depth. Let's talk about what that means. We're talking about multiple initiatives and talking about 500,000 immigrants per year and welcoming them here, and I feel like that is more of an ideological position rather than something that is realistic. We were just mentioning the housing crisis. I feel like that's not being taken into consideration. Do you not have anything to say about that? Well, I don't agree with you, but you say that you take that into consideration, these issues? Well, yes, volume is important, but also we have to look at what provinces, education institutions, and everything that is requested by people internationally. If we're talking about refugees in Ukraine or Afghanistan or Syria, that's a lot of people when you add them up. But of course, there is the ability to welcome people in our infrastructure as a country, but I think that we can manage. I think we can do it with regards to housing and so on. Inaudible. That's all the time we have. Ms. Ashton for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Minister, we know that Francophone communities that are outside of Quebec talk about immigration as being essential to the survival of their communities. As a new minister, what order of priority would you give to the Francophone immigration and the work that has to be done around that? With regards to the identity of our country, that's one of the most important priorities I have, top priorities I have. As a minister, I can't have just one priority, but I would put that at the top of the list. We talk about identity as a country, as a bilingual country. If we don't do our work federally with regards to our jurisdiction, well, then we should all be ashamed of that. We have the mission and the duty to do that. And I think that that is something that we can achieve as a society. You talked about, or let us talk about, rather, the reality of immigration. Why are the processing delays so long? Programs for qualified workers in 2021, for example, had to wait more than 100 days for the processing of their files. How can you improve or ensure the immigration of foreign or of francophones when these delays are unacceptable? I will pass the mic to my colleague. Thank you for the question. After COVID, indeed, there were very long delays, and we were quite transparent with regards to the initiatives that the minister put in place in order to get through this. Now we are back to the standard service for students. It was 60 days. Now it's 46 days. Now we are back to our standards, but there is still some work ahead of us. It's not done. There's the talent stream, the highly qualified talent stream. That's 14 days, and that is a way for us to attract international talent to Canada. Progress has been made, but there is still progress to be made. Thank you, Ms. Fox, and thank you, Ms. Ashton. Next question is between Mr. Godin and Mr. Kmitch. A couple of minutes. I would like to hear you, Deputy Minister, on the centers of the Center for Innovation and Francophone Immigration. Various people said different things about various things. I think that there is an urgent situation for Francophone immigration. Is a Center for Innovation and Francophone Immigration essential, or in the short term, to see results? Well, first of all, it's not a center that will provide customer service. So short term, not sure, but long term, maybe. We talked about mechanisms a lot today. This will be a very important center. They will distribute and select projects. There are people who have more experience than I do to promote French. But there's also, there are always 6 people on this project. Of course, we'd like more to be done. Of course, we could talk about giving them a bit more work. Sorry, my time is short. I think that it's bad to invest Canadians' money this way. We invested $12.9 million into this center and then $5 million in order to be efficient. I think sincerely that the public servants that you have here with you have the actual skills to understand the situation in order to correct course, in order for us to get immediate results. So I just want to share my opinion with you. I think that we're on the wrong path, and I think we're wasting time. And in the meantime, Francophone immigration is declining, and we're not reacting quickly enough. So I'm going to share my time with my colleague, Mr. Kmitch. Sorry, another 3 minutes for Mr. Kmitch. One more, another one. This is a podcast from Radio-Canada. Foreign students are affected by immigration. They said that all these students are working hard to come here, and then after a year or so, a year and a half of being here, they don't think it's worth staying in Canada to finish their complete their education. I thought the goal of all politicians and of all Canadians is to bring people here in order to get them to stay here, and not just to work, to find work or just to study, but to become a Canadian citizen. That's the point of immigration for me. It's to have more Canadian citizens, to have people come here, and have more people in this Canadian family, and especially in Quebec, also in Quebec. So how can we have these kinds of stories, people saying that it's too difficult and too expensive to find housing in Canada, and then they leave Canada because of these kinds of issues? Well, of course, I don't want to minimize their experience. There are hundreds of thousands of people who say that it is worth it to come here. But I would say that it's not only the case for international students, as in they don't always want to come here to stay here. Look at people who go to Canadians who went to Oxford University in England. They didn't stay there. They came back here and they became ministers. So people who study abroad are very highly sought out. Canada is one of the hottest destinations for these people. People don't necessarily have to stay, nor do they necessarily want to stay, but there are means for them to stay in certain cases. There are certain institutions that don't do their job correctly, and they are just filling in their coffers, and there's a distinction to make.
Earlier this year, Neil Yates, former Deputy Minister of the Department, produced a report called IRCC Organizational Review Report. It's a 28-page report, I'm told, that Paul Wells has gotten a copy of. And in it, it has organizational recommendations for this department, because organization deeply impacts all streams of immigration. It'll impact the quality and our ability to attract French-speaking students to Canada and immigrants to Canada. Have you read the report, first of all? Have you looked at the recommendations? And can this committee have that report?
Look, far from me, and I hope it doesn't affect my political position, to recommend that people read Paul Wells' Substack. But he did a great article with the Deputy Minister to my right on that, and she committed to implementing a great number of the recommendations in the report. And I think that's worth a further discussion.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Sorry, Mr. Kimmich. That's time. Mr. Serry, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you, Mr. Minister, for being here today, especially on such short notice. And thank you so much for the work that you do. From the beginning, when you started working in July, you immediately started talking about Francophone immigration in your initial remarks. I think you understood what's on your plate very quickly. In the north of Ontario, of course, these are issues that are very important, and that's where my constituents are. I have some questions for you. We've had some recommendations. One recommendation is the following. There are companies that promote the idea of international studies. Some of them have fraudulent means. How do you foresee preventing such companies from taking advantage of foreign students in this way? Of course, I've talked about these kinds of stakeholders that take advantage of this, and they give students a false hope. It's quite disheartening to see these students come here suffering and get an education that does not meet their expectations. And then there are institutions, of course, that are not that are not very well positioned to help their students with various resources, for example, housing. This is an issue. I don't want to use hyperbole, but I also don't want to minimize it. Certain provinces, of course, within their jurisdiction, do better than others. Here's the challenge that we have as federal government, and of course, myself as well as minister. We need to find what requires a solution. That's not my job, and I'm sure that provinces would tell me to slow my roll if I said that I was policing structural funding for higher education institutions in various provinces. These institutions have adapted themselves in order to welcome foreign students who pay about 3 or 4 times than our children pay. This is indeed a challenge that we have, and it's there's a question here of the ecosystem that's created. My job is to look at the visa process and the reliability of institutions that benefit from this visa process and to get rid of fraud. Here's what we're looking into. We will have to coordinate with the institutions and provinces. We're looking at which institutions are more reliable than others, and maybe we will even provide some sort of benefits to the good institutions and not the bad ones. It won't be done overnight, and I know there's a lot of frustration, but this is something that we can't stop overnight without there being very bad repercussions.
Thank you very much. My second question, Mr. Minister, the action plan. We added $137 million to that over the next 5 years to increase Francophone immigration levels. You mentioned in your speech about Western Africa, how important it is to offer more services there, and we heard from our colleague Mr. Durand earlier the importance. He highlighted as a chair of the APF of the importance of increasing Francophone immigration from Africa. Do you have additional measures to seek out more students from Africa, perhaps with the funding from the action plan? Well, yes. And despite your colleague who decried the center, it is a center that will help us with exactly that. That is conducting work internationally. It's located in Dieppe, but it will do work internationally to ensure that we have the proper mechanisms in place, whether in Western Africa or elsewhere, including overseas missions, to promote Canada abroad. I spoke earlier about the specific funding that dealt with teachers. That's very important. Your colleagues raised the importance of having this accompaniment, which is different from an Anglophone who could come here. There need to be teachers. And we can talk about provincial legislation or the federal legislation, but the strength of language and the education of my children and grandchildren is in public schools. And so we need to talk about public school reform in French, whether it's in Quebec, even if it's not my jurisdiction. We need to talk about the future of the French language, because that goes through a high-quality education, and that ensures the strength of the language. Thank you, Mr. Minister. When you came before committee, you were here last week, and we displaced you, and you came back. The committee thanks you for your availability. One moment, Mr. Godin. I would just like to tell you that for the coming study on the economic development of official language minority communities, it is this Friday, 4 p.m., deadline for the parties to provide their witness lists. So it is this Friday at 4 p.m. So to the NDP, the Bloc, the Liberals, and the Conservatives, Friday, 4 p.m., Ottawa time for witness lists. I would also like to tell you that the analysts provide you the broad strokes of the report that she would like to draft. I have no. I think that you should be made aware of that. If you have additional things to propose, please do so in writing. That will be quicker. Because of the time and the technical issues in the first hour, we won't have time to do an adjournment to come back into in camera. So the next in camera meeting, we will deal with what we had on our plate. But if you agree with me, I give my blessing to the analyst to start drafting the report based on the outline that she proposed today, and I fully support that. Mr. Gaudin, you have the floor. Quick question. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for joining us. I would like to determine whether we could receive the IRCC organizational review report. I think that could be useful in the study on Francophone immigration. Is it possible to receive that report, that it be sent to the clerk so that we can receive the information and have a look? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. The meeting is adjourned.